Welcome to chapter 12. What is Fed? In this chapter, we have four objectives. The first objective is what is the Fed? The second objective is what is the mission of the Fed? And the third objective is how does the Fed change market conditions with interest rates? And the fourth objective is what does the Fed tell us about Mr. Market? So let's get started. There is a lot of people have no idea what the Fed really is. The Fed is nothing but a short term for the United States Federal Reserve. What the Federal Reserve tries to do is to manage the US currency and ultimately control the US economy. And the reason for the Fed, if you go back to prior to 1913, if you went around the United States, you would have found 30,000 different currencies in circulation. Local governments could issue currency, state governments could issue currency, pretty much anyone out there could issue whatever type of currency they wanted. And what you had was sometimes the currency would be completely worthless. Sometimes it could actually hold its value, and this led to a lot of unrest throughout the country because there was no regulation or any standards for the rules for creating currency. And so after 1913, after the Federal Reserve was created, and there was one federal currency which was the dollar, and that and itself brought some stability to the country. So after 1913, after the Federal Reserve was created, there was one federal currency which was the dollar, and that itself brought some stability to the country. And so that's really the reason that the Fed was created. Now, there is a lot of different reasons and a lot of interesting things you can read out there about the Federal Reserve. But that's their primary purpose is to bring stability to the country. Now, whether they are doing that or not, that's arguable statement, but that's the mission. Some of the stuff that a lot of people might find really amazing about the Fed is that it's a private institution, although the directors are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Congress. That once those people were in that position, they stay there for 12 years, and once they are in that position, they don't answer to the president. They don't answer to the Congress. They are now their own entity. So after that nomination process takes place, the Fed, the people that are in there running it are really, they can do anything they want. The Fed is a private institution in its own by 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, commercial banks, foreign banks, and even individuals, especially if you go back to the early when the Fed was created and you had some very wealthy people that actually set all this up. And there is a very interesting book that's written on this. It's called The Creature from the Jekyll Island, which kind of gives you a different perspective on the Fed. So where does that money come from that the Fed prints and puts out there? And some people are really surprised that the Fed actually has the ability to simply print money from thin air. They can just print more money if they want. And I mean, that's what you saw in 2008 and 2009. Whenever they were pumping a lot of money into the system, they're printing that money in there, they're issuing it out in order to put more money into the system so people will spend it. Much of the activity of the Fed is not made public. So they hold closed door meetings where people cannot go in there and listen to it. All they know is after that they come out, they go, hey, interest rates are going to rise or is not going to rise. And there is a lot of people out there that we even debate whether the Fed is even constitutional. But that's not really the point of this video. I just kind of highlighted these few things here to kind of throw out some intriguing facts that make you wonder maybe you would be more interested to read about the Fed. This is the four things that the Fed really tries to accomplish. They want to maximize employment, stabilize prices, they want to supervise and regulate banks, they want to maintain the stability of the financial system, and they are also there to service the debts for the US federal government. So the thing that we really going to focus on for this lesson, because it relates to stocks and bonds and investing, is maintaining the stability of the financial system. So, how does the Fed stabilizes the financial system? If there is one thing that the Fed really understands, and trust me, there is some very smart people running the Fed. They understand this model very right, really well. This is the fear and the greed cycle model that we have been talking about the two previous chapters. And here is Mr. Market. And as you can see there, in 2006, 2007, and 8, Mr. Market is screaming for everybody to join in and take the market higher and higher. And the Federal Reserve knew that, they absolutely knew that there was a bubble coming in the economy, and they also knew that there was a recession that was going to be following it. And so they were trying to affect that, and the way that the Federal Reserve was trying to prevent that bubble from happening, where they were adjusting interest rates. And so whenever the market was climbing and getting really high, they were trying to raise the interest rate so that they could kind of slow it down. And then whenever it crashed, they were trying to lower interest rates in order to induce spending. So the same thing happening right now while I'm recording this video in April 2023. You look at this graph and you can see similar pattern in the market. You see often in the news Fed chairman Jerome Powell coming and declaring there is an increase in the interest rate on zero point 0.5 basis, on 0.25 basis, to reduce the spending. The greed cycle started around March 2020 when the coronavirus hit. We started seeing a trend in all buying stocks, thinking the price would always go up, increasing the value of the stock, and it skyrocketed. By the end of 2021, the stock market peaked and the interest rate was also very, very low. This is when the Fed started interfering and started increasing the interest rate to slow down the market and the consumer spending. The interest rate went from almost zero to close to 5% now. They want people to spend less, buy less, build less, etc. by increasing the interest rate. So in order to better understand this, I'm going to give you a little example here. Okay, let's just say that it was Christmas time and you got a $5,000 bonus for your job where you're working, and you have always been wanting a new car, and you have been eyeing up on the car on the right. And so the question I'm going to ask here is, what is the car worth for you? Let's just assume that you have made an agreement with yourself that no matter what, you are not going to spend more than $35,000 on this car. So let's just say that the value for you for buying that car was $35,000. So you're going to use your $5,000 as a down payment on that new car that you hopefully can go and buy for under $35,000. So let's look at what happens here when you go to the dealership and you show up and you look at the car price and it's perfect. It's $30,000, which is under the amount that you wanted to pay. And I'm going to use a real extreme interest rate here just to kind of highlight and exemplify something for you. But let's assume that the best interest rate you could get on this car would be 15%. Okay. Based off of that high interest rate, your monthly payment on that car for a 5-year loan would be $594 a month. And the total interest that you would be paying over that 5-year period would be $10,684. So the adjusted price on that car is not a $30,000 car, it's actually a $40,684. And so because the price was higher than what you valued that car out of being $35,000, you don't want to buy it because it's too expensive, that a monthly payment was too high. So let's look at this from a different angle. Let's say we still go back to the dealership and the price for the car is $30,000. But now, this time, the interest rate that you can get on the car is 1%. With the interest rate only being 1%, your monthly payment now is $427, and the total interest that you would be paying over for 5-year period is only $641. So now the adjusted price on this car is only $30,641, which is under the 35,000 that you felt the car was worth and that you are willing to spend. Therefore, you buy the car. So let's look at this scenario side by side. We have the same car with the same market price, which was $30,000, but we have a different interest rates, one being 15% and the other one being 1%. And so we got a different value at the end and therefore different spending habits. In the one case, you bought the car, and then the other case, you didn't buy the car, even though the car was the same exact price. So those interest rates change your spending habits. And so the Federal Reserve understand this. They understand that if they can adjust the interest rates, they can adjust your spending habits. So if we look over here, this is Mr. Ben Bernanke, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve in 2007 time frame. And so he was the head guy ultimately making the decision on how the Federal Reserve is going to adjust the interest rates. And so when we look at our Dow Jones Industrial Average at this time frame, we can see how the market was climbing and getting very high. And of course, Mr. Bernanke realized this. And so at this point, he was trying to raise interest rates. He was trying to make them fairly high. And if you remember from the chapter 7, with the bonds around this time, interest rates were around 5% back in 2007 timeframe. And this was his attempt in order to slow down this bubble that he knew it was happening. As I am recording this video in April 2023, we have the Fed chair, Mr. Jerome Powell, doing the same thing as Mr. Ben Bernanke did in 2007. So their mindset is we need to stop this bubble from happening. And the way that they does is by raising those interest rates. So borrowing the money becomes expensive, and so the people spend less, which slow down the economy, and hopefully the recession doesn't happen. But in 2007, we actually had a very harsh recession, and after that happened, then the Federal Reserve's reaction is okay, we need to stimulate the economy back. We need people to spend more money now. So what do? They lower the interest rates because they need all that money to get out in the system, and they need people to start buying things so the economy grows again. So if there is one thing that Federal Reserve knows is that Mr. Market is wrong and they are trying to counteract Mr. Market by adjusting those interest rates. So you can see here we have the Fed keeps raising interest rates. The Fed pretty much telling you that you are in a greed cycle. When the Fed is lowering the interest rates, they are pretty much telling you that you are in a fear cycle. And so the real question comes down to which assets do you want to own and when? So in this scenario, let's look at the interest rates. When interest rates are really high, what type of assets do we want to be buying at this point? And the answer is that you want to be buying bonds. The reason you want to be buying bonds when interest rates are high is probably you are going to have a coupon that's paying you very high interest rate. If you don't understand this part, you need to probably go back to chapter 7, 8, and 9 in order to understand these principles that I am talking about, so you can understand what a coupon is. And when you buy a bond at a high interest rate, you are going to be receiving a very good coupon, which is going to be paying you a great return. And then the added bonus is whenever those interest rates drop in the future, which is going to happen eventually, and those interest rates drop, and the market price of the bond is going to go up. And then you actually have the liquidity to sell it and put it into a stock, which is the really the end goal is to get that into a company. So now let's look at when the interest rates are low. This is when you want to be buying stocks because if you are in bonds, you got a really low coupon and you don't want to be really doing that. The stocks are very cheap at this point. They are undervalued. And so what you want to do is you want to go out and find a company with a very low debt, positive earnings, and that has a strong price to book ratio, which we had talked about all throughout chapter 1 to 6. And you are going to get a very strong buy that has a really good intrinsic value, and you are going to end up making a lot of money on that whenever the market recovers. So, how do you know what's considered a high or a low interest rate? And this is really building up into what we are going to discuss all through in future chapters is that this is a relative comparison which you are going to be doing in order to properly value a stock or a bond for that matter. Is what you are going to be constantly comparing the return you expect to get with a stock versus the return that you expect to get with a bond. So Let's assume that based off of the market price, let's just say we are kind of in a greed cycle. The stocks are trending really high, and so the best return you could expect to get with the stock is maybe 5% based off of the high market price. But then when you look at the bond, let's assume that the bond is at 5.5% because of the market. So in this scenario, a bond has less risky, generally speaking, than a stock. And so this would be a very easy decision that you would want to be buying bonds because of the interest rates. And so by you being able to relatively compare a stock versus a bond, it's always going to put you on the right side of the fence. Whether it's time to be buying stocks or whether it is time to be buying bonds. And that's truly the art of asset valuation. And we are going to get into this so much more in the future chapters too. And I really looking forward to seeing you over there in those chapters, because it's really going to start teaching you the important steps that you really need to understand. So that concludes chapter 12, what is the Fed? And in this chapter, we learned about what is Fed, and then we learned what is the mission of the Fed, and we learned how does the Fed changes market conditions with interest rates, and finally, we learned that what does the Fed tells us about Mr. Market. And so I really enjoyed this course from chapter 1 to chapter 12. This completes course for beginners, and I look forward to seeing you over into chapter 13 and onwards, where you are really going to start learning some of the important things for our intermediate lessons with the bonds and stocks.